Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Program on Extremism at the George Washington University. My name is Jennifer Baker, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow here at the program. But I'm also a retired FBI Special Agent, which makes today's discussion all the more meaningful to me. So this year marks the 45th anniversary of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, the nationwide framework that unites federal, state, and local partners to detect, disrupt, and prosecute terrorist threats. Each FBI field office operates the JTTF, and today we're going to highlight one of them, the North Texas JTTF, which has been at the forefront of major counterterrorism successes from foiling bombing plots to dismantling extremist networks, demonstrating the value of interagency collaboration in safeguarding our communities. So more than 2 decades after their post-9/11 expansions, JTTFs remain the central platform for putting U.S. counterterrorism strategy into action. They have matured into a preventative framework, one designed to identify and interdict threats before they actually materialize, shifting the paradigm from reactive response to proactive disruption. And in today's session, we will explore that evolution through 2 case studies. The 2009 plot by Hussam Samadi to detonate a vehicle bomb in a Dallas high-rise, and the 2011 WMD conspiracy involving Khalid al-Dosari. But first and foremost, let me introduce you to our speaker and tell you a little bit about Tom Petrowski. Tom brings a wealth of operational insight from the JTTF in Dallas. He retired from the FBI in 2018 after over 23 years of diverse service as a supervisory special agent and a legal advisor. His Bureau national security experience included leading a counterterrorism team in Iraq, supervising the North Texas JTTF, and being detailed to the CIA Counterterrorism Center at Langley, Virginia. His criminal operational experience included assignments to a multi-agency street gang task force in California, over 10 years in the FBI SWAT program, and leading the war crimes investigation of the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq. He served in the FBI legal program as a legal instructor at the FBI Academy in Quantico, and incidentally was my instructor over 20 years ago, and he was also the Chief Division Counsel at the FBI Dallas Division. Prior to joining the FBI, Tom served as an Army Special Forces officer with numerous deployments overseas, and he practiced corporate law in Boston. Since retiring from the FBI, Tom has been staying pretty busy. He's teaching at both Texas A&M and University of Texas Systems, and he has served as a subject matter expert for the U.S. Department of Justice in its police reforms. Just a quick note before we get started, so everyone knows, we'll hold a short Q&A session at the end of Tom's presentation. So please hold your questions until the end, but feel free to enter them into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. So with that, it is my honor to turn the floor over to Tom. Thank you again for making time out of your busy schedule, and so looking forward to hearing your presentation. Tom?
Well, thank you, Jen. And thank you to Dr. Bedino and team for this invitation. Let me find the presentation here. And thank you all for being here as well. All right. The Zoom world we live in. What I'd like to talk about this morning is just, as Jen mentioned, we just had the 45th anniversary of the JTTF. A few comments on that, the history, the evolution of the JTTF, and probably more importantly, some points where we failed to evolve and should have. So I think most people, when they hear of the 45th anniversary, I think it's surprising to many that we actually had a Joint Terrorism Task Force in the FBI in 1980. But the reality is we had so many attacks over the years. For example, in the 70s, we had Black September, doing the Olympic Munich attack in 72. The first terrorist attack I think the Bureau has on record is back in 1920 when a group believed to be Italian anarchists detonated what I guess was one of the first vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. It was a horse-drawn wagon with an enormous bomb on it on Wall Street, killing dozens of people, injuring hundreds. So that started it out. And then through the 70s, more issues. What we also had in the 70s were a number of collaborations between the FBI and NYPD with task forces, mainly violent crime, bank robbery. In 1980, they formed the first Joint Terrorism Task Force with 10 FBI agents and 10 NYPD officers. So from 1980 till 9/11, we had around 250 acts of terrorism in the U.S. that were documented. Now, just to be clear as to what we're talking about, when we say a task force like this, we're talking about taking agencies with this common counterterrorism mission and leveraging what each brings. So the collaboration that comes from that results in a really productive synergy. Now, I'll also just comment, the FBI does a lot of task forces in a number of different mission sets, everything from white collar healthcare fraud, for example, to crimes against children, or these pedophile hunting task forces, and of course, a lot of street gang and drug-oriented task forces. All very successful when you get these different agencies together in one place. From 80 to 1982, 9/11, there was obviously a real development. There were numerous acts of terrorism overseas and a lot of intelligence, which indicated the coming international threat, so global jihad and other sources. To me, the most significant event was the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. We're all very familiar, of course, with 9/11, but it seems like a lot of people really don't appreciate what happened on 2/26, February 26, 1993, when Ramzi Youssef, the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and his team got a large VBIED under the World Trade Center. And really only for dumb luck, when it detonated, it did not drop the tower. And that was because the driver delivering the vehicle basically panicked at the last minute and didn't put it where he was supposed to. Had the bomb been put where it was supposed to, it would have dropped a tower. So I know hindsight's 2020, but to me, I feel very strongly on the morning of January 27th, we should have had the reckoning with respect to our posture on counterterrorism that we ended up having on 9/12. But then through the 90s, of course, we have Timothy McVeigh blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma City, Khobar Towers in 96, open fatwas from Al-Qaeda in 96 and 98, the embassy bombings in Africa in 98. So that did lead to the indictment of Osama bin Laden. But really no substantial systemic changes. Even there's an infamous 1998 memo from the then CIA director, George Tenet, where he said the CIA and the U.S. intelligence community was at war with Al-Qaeda. And the FBI did stand up its counterterrorism division in 1998 with essentially a skeleton crew. But really, with all of that going on, the only really, in my opinion, significant event was the development of some criminal statutes, largely in the Clinton administration, which defined material support, defined the process to designate organizations as terrorist organizations, and then a host of other statutes that dealt with WMD and terrorism financing and others that gave some teeth to the JTTF. But again, it took something much more significant because on the morning of 9/11, we only had 35 JTTFs across the country. So, tragically, as is typical in government, it is in the fallout of crisis that we frantically go back and try and remedy inaction, which is where we were in the months after 9/11. Now, of course, the number of JTTFs went up exponentially with a lot of coordination with CIA. In fact, the Counterterrorism Division, was increased enormously and co-located with the CIA. And just as important, the FBI also created an intelligence directorate, which allowed for the analysis and collection of information. So as you see here, by this year, we had 280 JTTFs in 55 field offices, very well staffed. So again, the JTTF really brings together everybody under one umbrella. Probably the biggest lesson we learned on the morning of 9/12 was that this has to be one team, one fight. There tragically really was a lot of autonomy, I guess to put it nicely, between the agencies, not a lot of information sharing. What we have now with the JTTF as sort of the primary conduit is that connection between the entire law enforcement community, the entire intelligence and military communities. So we've got, CONUS in the United States, over 900,000 law enforcement officers split about 19,000 law enforcement agencies, now really connected to intelligence community and the JSOC operators that are overseas doing what they do. Most significantly in the short period after 9/11, in my opinion, was the Patriot Acts causing the information between agencies to flow. The policy of the Department of Justice before the Patriot Act was that the U.S. intelligence community would not share information with the U.S. law enforcement community. It was referred to as having this wall in between them. And in the 9/11 commission hearings, there was a lot of great testimony that really exposed how just foolish this was. Patrick Fitzgerald, the lead federal prosecutor, Southern District of New York, who indicted bin Laden, testified. And he explained how there was his criminal UBL task force with the FBI in New York, and literally in the same building, there was another FBI UBL task force that was the National Security Task Force. And they could not share information. So when the wall came down, that was, to me, probably the most significant thing that turbocharged the JTTFs. Because now all these police officers got very high security clearances. Their chiefs got security clearances. It wasn't long after the Patriot Act when we were having secure video teleconferences in the office with chiefs of police from JTTF sponsoring agencies, the relevant chain of command, on the screen with the director of the FBI, the director of the CIA, people throughout the U.S. intelligence and military community, talking about the threat stream that day. What was going on? What did we all need to know? Because again, then it was one team, one fight. I guess better late than never. So now in terms of the on-the-ground feeling at the JTTF, as Jennifer mentioned, historically, the primary approach of American law enforcement, of course, is reactive. A crime is committed, someone reports it, law enforcement responds, investigates, a prosecution occurs as appropriate, bring the perpetrators to justice. But the paradigm in the JTTF mission is preventive. We cannot wait for the act to occur. We have to find out who's doing it before the threat manifests into an assault. Now that seems obvious, but I guess in a practical matter, what does that really mean to the people in the trenches of the JTTF doing this? And I offer a simple hypothetical. Imagine if all of us on this Zoom were on a violent crimes task force, right? Say a bank robbery task force. Exciting thing to do for a living, right? We get the call of banks robbed, we roll, collect evidence, arrest people who did it. But imagine if our mission on our bank robbery task force were to change, and the new playbook was, for now on, we are not going to respond to bank robberies. We're going to go out and find the people who were thinking about robbing a bank, the people who are planning a bank robbery, and then somehow interdict them before they ever get their hands on a bank in the first place. How different is that mission? How more difficult is that mission? How the heck do you even do that? And the short answer is by collecting an enormous amount of information, being intelligence-based, Having the analytical capability to take that information and distill it down into some usable format. Basically, know what dots you need, know how you get them, and then be able to connect them and develop effective, what I just refer to as hunting strategies. A very, very, very challenging mission. Now, quick footnote. There's a lot of significant First Amendment issues with that information collection. This is a fight that every JTTF supervisor goes through. When can the FBI or JTTF even open an assessment on someone because they're speaking the unspeakable? And I'll just say a very challenging issue that's continuing to evolve. So we're going to look at two examples, as Jen mentioned, Khalid al-Dosari, a Saudi national, and Hossam Samadi, a Jordanian national, both in the country, both in Texas. Excuse me. But just for context, where were we in the late teens in terms of the threat from Al-Qaeda that involved Samadi and al-Dosari? And what had happened in those years, 07 to 11, there was a really significant change in the threat stream from Al-Qaeda. Up until that point, they had largely followed the Osama bin Laden playbook, which was go big and then go dormant. So fly a plane into a building, blow up the USS Cole in Yemen, do the Khobar Towers, blow up an embassy, and then be silent for a long period of time. Bin Laden never endorsed trying to radicalize people on the fringe. Only use your inner circle, absolute true believers to do the attack and trust nobody else. And that all changed in 07, 08 when Anwar al-Awlaki, the guy on the low left on the slide, got to Yemen. He was a U.S. citizen, born in the U.S., educated in the U.S., went to Yemen, was actually incarcerated for a few years when he first got there, but released in 07. And Samir Khan was another American, the guy on the low right, which was his cohort, who was a very gifted cyber guy. Together, they put together an extremely sophisticated and effective online radicalization platform that started radicalizing people all over the world. It culminated in around 09 or 2010 when they developed Inspire magazine. I think many of you probably have heard of. And that had the one chapter titled How to Build a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom, that the Boston bombers and many others have used. And they started inspiring people all over the planet to do minor attacks. And these are people who were not really true believers. I used to refer to them to coin the Russians' term as just useful idiots, right? These are not true believers for the most part. They're radicalized people looking for a reason to be radical. I think a simple example of that is Elias Rodriguez, the 31-year-old guy from Chicago who drives to D.C., murders in cold blood two young, innocent Israeli staffers for Palestine, he says. But it wasn't long ago he was either in Black Lives Matter or a socialist liberation group. So just clearly somebody who was a violent, radicalized person looking for a reason to be violent and radical. And now he can spend the rest of his life in a cage. So, but the point I make is at that point in the late teens, the threat stream that the JTTFs were managing went up just exponentially because we were looking for the next 9/11 team coming in, and all of a sudden we have useful idiots surfacing all over doing things like what Rodriguez did. So, moving to the case studies and the strategies that worked. The first one, al-Dosari, I'll talk about, was a function of what we called back then the tripwire program. Intelligence-based approach where headquarters from that 30,000-foot view looked at the whole private sector and identified where would someone go if they were building an IED. So obviously chemical companies, fertilizer companies, there are a number of industry-specific companies, and then send leads out to FBI, JTTFs across the country to go out, liaise with these companies, develop a relationship, And basically, this came down to the see something, say something message that we were already saying. But this was putting handshakes and faces and exchanging business cards and really making clear that no call was unwelcome. And not long after that, in February 2011, my JTTF was contacted by the FBI in Charlotte, North Carolina, who had called them they'd been contacted by a Carolina biological company, who was one of their tripwire private sector partners, saying, we just got this very suspicious order from a man named Khalid Al-Dosari in Lubbock, Texas. He wants a very, very large quantity of a chemical called phenol, which has some industrial applications, but it's also very commonly used in IEDs. And the manner where he wanted it shipped to a shipping company, not to a lab, not to a business. And it just seemed kind of odd to us. And you said to call. So we looked, we identified him and looked into him. And what we found was that he was a Saudi national, 20 years old, here on an academic scholarship, a very, very competitive scholarship that he won while he was in Saudi Arabia. It let him go to Vanderbilt for a year in an English as a second language program before he enrolled at Texas Tech in Lubbock as a chemical engineering major. But did very poorly, failed out after his first year. In fact, when we were looking at him, he was going to a small community college taking a business course just to keep his student visa going. But based on that, and we did, when we backgrounded him, found some connections between him and some actors in the Al-Qaeda portfolio. That, coupled with the odd order for something like phenol, got us a warrant to look at his emails and online Google searches. And what we immediately found was that he had amassed everything he needed for a large IED. He was building a trinitrophenol bomb, TNP, commonly referred to as picric acid, made up of phenyl, sulfuric, and nitric acid. And what we found is that he literally had everything, all lab equipment, everything he needed, except the phenol. We were pretty sure. We couldn't find an order for it, and he was still looking for it. So we were concerned he might have some, but not enough. But the two primary questions we had immediately, he obviously presented an immediate threat. But our concerns were, first of all, was he acting alone? When we look at someone like this, our assumption is, we make the assumption that he's not acting alone. He's a member of a cell, be controlled by some hostile entity overseas, which means if we grab him prematurely, everybody else gets a green light and things start blowing up. So even though we kind of had him and he was immediately arrestable, we had to watch him for a while. And then we wanted to find the lab. We also found online that he was doing a lot of research into targets, what he wanted to blow up, and then in a lot of extremist blogs and web forums. These are photos of a search. We did eventually go in 4 times and do surreptitious searches of his apartment. So while he was away, he was, of course, under 24/7 physical surveillance. We had people watching him. But when he was away for long periods of time, we got into his apartment and we found everything there. The lab was in his apartment, from the acids, glassware. He even had a full hazmat suit to make this. For target analysis and selection, he wanted to ultimately blow up a large IED in New York's Times Square, but was going to do a dry run in Dallas. So he was going to blow something up in Dallas first, just to see how that went. Really wanted to go after George Bush, but his assessment of Bush's lifestyle and where he lived realized that was just a little bit too hard a target. At the end, his plan was to put it in a backpack and get it into a Dallas nightclub and detonate it inside of a nightclub, which would have been just devastating. Spent a lot of time in blogs talking about how the family, the royal family in Saudi Arabia were traitors. A lot of negative input on that. Going on and on, of course, about his devotion to bin Laden, greatly influenced by Al Qaeda. They have it right, and all that. But best of all, he was a meticulous journal taker. So he filled out a journal every day, which we found, in which he detailed what he was doing, why he was doing it, really exaggerating. So he in the journal, for example, he said that he uh, applied for the scholarship in Saudi Arabia specifically so he can get to the United States and attack, which was nonsense. But the journals were spectacular. We put 2 microphones in there, and he would actually read some of these journals in English, talking about how he was a hero and why he was doing all this, which I'm sure you can appreciate did not play well with a jury in rural Texas later. So after watching him for about 3 weeks, we realized we had great surveillance on him, technically and physically. He wasn't talking to anybody. So we went ahead and arrested him, prosecuted him, notwithstanding what he said about the royal family in Saudi Arabia. They wrote a blank check for his defense, hired a law firm out of Houston that made a fortune. Long trial, long appeal to the Fifth Circuit. But at the end of the day, the jury deliberated less than 2 hours, which included lunch. And he will die in a cage in America. But the key points in this case that I want to make, the success in this case was not when he was found guilty. It was not when we arrested him. The success in this case is when headquarters came up with a hunting strategy that identified him while he was still just a threat before the threat manifested into an assault. Once my JTTF got his name, we just did what we do. Not to minimize that, I won't say it's the easy part, but the win here was at a headquarters level at the program designed to find him. So the next case, a little more complicated. We knew people were connecting online, of course. Now, this was 2009-ish. Where was social media back then? Obviously, very limited. Facebook and Twitter were really just starting. The direct one, Instagram, and all those were not quite running. But a lot of these people were talking in password-protected web groups. So that's what we were focusing on. And we went to the Crimes Against Children Task Forces. So these are the pedophile hunters. And the operation was called Innocent Images. And they had run very successful undercover operations into those pedophile password-protected sites. So we took their playbook and adapted it to the terrorism mission and putting Arabic-speaking undercovers into them. Now, when I say playbook, just again, I'm talking largely about the First Amendment issues. A lot of oversight in something like this. This distinguishes from what we see on TV, where they solve these things in 60 minutes. If we're going to send an undercover into a private web forum, what exactly can they do? What can they say? What can they hear? When can they go? What can we initially collect? And then after we look at what we collected, what do we retain permanently? So a lot of legal issues, a lot of oversight that's required. But we were there. We found someone in one of these Arabic-speaking extremist web forums who really stood out, which was saying something, because people in these web forums spoke, really the unspeakable, just celebrating terrorist attacks overseas, lots of praise for bin Laden. He should be running the world, a lot of that. But one really stood out. Someone who purported to be living in the United States, wanted to be part of the next attack, going on and on and on about his devotion, personal devotion to bin Laden. He wants to die for bin Laden, wants to be a soldier for bin Laden. All I need is the tools. So we watched him for a while. And eventually, the one online undercover reached out to him in the forum, made an initial connection, and then took it out one-on-one. In the initial conversation, he identified himself. He was very candid with us. We confirmed his identity, started working up a lifestyle. But unlike Al-Dosari, who was immediately recognized as a serious threat, the priority we had with this case, with Samadi, was to assess whether he was real. Again, we had useful idiots all over the place. We were constantly looking, assessing, and closing, looking and because people would say silly things. There were so many posers and cheerleaders out there, and trying to determine who actually presented a threat. We used to refer to it as distinguishing the jihadists from the jihadists, right? The blowhards. And I will tell you candidly, I thought we were going to be closing this right away. He was living in a small town just south of the Metroplex, off the interstate, in an apartment, working at a convenience store in one of these large gas station convenience store things. Was in the country illegally. His father had brought him here years earlier. Father went back and left his son. But we kept talking to him. And after about 3 months and a couple dozen conversations, we had a meeting with the Behavioral Analysis Unit. I think you're all familiar with them, from the Criminal Minds show, the advisors, psych-eval folks who were very involved in this undercover. And they said, look, he's saying a lot of things. He's being very candid. We're not sensing any fluff or BS. So you should probably go ahead and meet him and set up an in-person undercover, which was a big deal. I'll just say, again, the tempo on my JTTF was blistering, and to take the time to put together an in-person was a huge endeavor logistically. But we went ahead and did it. We got a great Arabic-speaking undercover, very experienced, who came in, met Samadi at a hotel. The story was he was representing the next cell AQ that was going to do the attack. And this was basically a get acquainted. Do you really want to be part of this? Why should we let you in on this? Long meeting, they came out. I'll never forget, after that, when we were winding down, I got the undercover alone. Again, this is an older, experienced undercover who I had a lot of respect for. And I said, look, what do you really think of this? And I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, Tom, I just looked into the eyes of Satan, which coming from him was really significant. And then he said something to the effect of, like, fasten your seatbelts. This kid is, I think, for real. So we met him another couple times. After, I think, the third meet, we had another meeting with the behavioral analysis folks, who said to us that they were looking at around 100 of these people across the country through the undercover, online undercover. And their assessment was, if they were going to rank those 100 from 1 to 100, Hossam Samadi would be ranked number 1 in terms of a potential threat. So this was really changing. So we kept talking to him. Now, entrapment was a big issue. Every communication we had with him, we tried to talk him out of this, which was an issue. In fact, on a couple of occasions, BAU contacted us and said, you may be overdoing the de-escalation a little bit on the entrapment issue. And their concern was that he might actually go out and commit an act of violence to sort of prove himself to us, right? Drive to Dallas and shoot a rabbi in the back. So, and then come back and say, that was me, I'm your guy. So we had to walk that fine line. But we maintained contact with him. Now, at the same time, we were also very concerned about whether he might act unilaterally, which was also a concern from a lot of people at headquarters. He says he wants to be a soldier of Al-Qaeda. What if he just says, the heck with it, I'm going to go do it on my own? Behavioral analysis assessment was, as long as he thought he was on the team, he was in Al-Qaeda, he will not act unilaterally. But, they said, the moment he finds out that you're not AQ and you're really the U.S. intelligence community, he's going to get very violent very quickly, which made the physical surveillance of him a real challenge. So this is a 24/7 thing that was consuming us. And then we had the fourth meeting, which is the photo on the left here with the fourth meeting. And in the fourth meeting, the undercover said to him, we have the capability of getting a message from you to bin Laden. So when they told somebody that, he became emotionally overwhelmed. He actually teared up. It took him a few minutes to compose himself. And then he sat there with his laptop for about 2 hours preparing this statement to bin Laden. And then the undercover set up a camcorder. Obviously, we had surreptitious cameras and microphones set up in the room, but he set up a camcorder. Somebody wrapped up for his disguise, and then produced a 7-minute rant where he just went on and on about his love and devotion for bin Laden, loved him more than his mother and father. He will die for him. He will die a soldier of Al-Qaeda. He'll be part of the next attack, which will make 9/11 look like a street fight. And for that 7 minutes of it, probably the most significant single piece of evidence that we had. So after that big meeting at headquarters, I still in my heart of hearts thought we were going to arrest him and deport him, frankly. Let's be done with this. We'll package him up, give him to the Jordanians. But when I went to headquarters for this meeting in person, behavioral analysis and the intel group both said we cannot deport him. If we deport him, someone like this is either going to attack people overseas, or more of a concern, he's going to be returned to the United States because his English was perfect. He was charismatic. He could fit in anywhere. So the meeting ended very abruptly when the assistant director turned to me and she just said, "Tom, this ends in Dallas." So got on a plane, came back and motivated the team and proceeded. So by this time, we're getting close to 9 months in, about 3 months online, 6 months of following them and doing the in-persons. The photos on the left were from him to us. He was spending a lot of time in downtown Dallas doing his target selection, a lot of online time trying to define very specifically what he wanted for a bomb. And he ended up, those are surveillance photos on the right. And he ended up picking this beautiful building in downtown Dallas called Fountain Place, primarily a banking finance center. Excuse me. If you recall, in 2008, we had a lot of some financial issues, and he thought that he could really exacerbate that by blowing up a building of banks. But selected that, and then again gave us very specific details on what he wanted for his vehicle-borne explosive, which we made for him, and this was it. Now, there've been a number of conversations with him about not having weapons. In many of the conversations, he talked about being armed. He felt he needed to be armed. I'm a soldier. I need to have a gun. And we kept talking to him about how that's not what this is. Stay under the radar. If you get pulled over by a police officer, that's not what you want. So on the day of the attack, which by the way was a Tuesday, so he had done a lot of surveillance, and he had determined, in his opinion, that Tuesday at noon was when we should blow up the building, because in his opinion, based on his reconnaissance, that's when the most people were in Fountain Place. So it needed to be on a Tuesday. So we picked a Tuesday. We meet him at a location, this parking garage, where you can see Fountain Place behind it. That morning when he left his house, we had surveillance on him, physical surveillance following him. And when he left, he immediately got on the phone with the undercover that he's talking to. Are we tracking? Are we set? Do you have the device? And they went through that. And then the undercover, again with him, broached. And by the way, you do not have a gun, right? Because nobody's bringing guns to this. And they went back and forth on that. And as soon as they hung up, somebody abruptly took a U-turn and zipped back home, ran into his apartment and came out and got into the car and went up. Later, when we executed a search warrant at his residence, we found a large frame 9mm, and we have no idea when and from whom he purchased that. But even though we had the surveillance on him, he did have a gun and he was armed, we believe. So we avoided that. But he came up. He met the undercover at this location and got the device. drove it into Fountain Place, and planted it. That's obviously afterwards. Um, as planned, he'd spent a lot of time in that garage, a lot of time in Fountain Place, walking around, doing a reconnaissance. That's the device after where he put it. Now, something else he had insisted on, Samadi, was that the bomb be detonated by him via his cell phone. So command detonation by a cell phone is something that was going on a lot in Iraq back then. And he on a number of occasions made the point to insist that he be the one to detonate the bomb. He used to say, pull the trigger. But he wanted to be the one to dial the number and cause the bomb to detonate. So what we also did with him was we came up with a very complicated timer device, which we said to him was just the backup. But it had, I think, 10 or 12 different steps that he had to do. There were written directions, again, just to show his motivation, his frame of mind, and his commitment to doing this. So he parked it, he set the timer, and again, but he was intending to detonate it himself. That's a close-up of the device. We ended up using real ammonium nitrate fertilizer, but those were C4 plastic explosive in there, inert, and the blasting caps were inert. And for reasons we never really understood, Samadi also insisted that there be lots of metal shrapnel attached to the device. I don't know what he thought shrapnel was going to do in an underground parking garage, but that's what all those bags are full of. And again, that's because he had insisted on that. This is Samadi leaving the building after planting it very casually. His whole demeanor that morning was, to me, just shocking. I think in my heart of hearts, I kept thinking at the last minute he was going to just not do this. But when I personally saw his face as he was driving the bomb from the garage there, and the look of determination was frightening to me, the casualness with which he left the building. And then also here, when the undercover was out front waiting for him, and Samadi jumped into the car, the first thing he says to the undercover is, "I have to go back into the building." And the undercover, of course, asked him why. And Samadi explained that when he parked the bomb, what he thought was the bomb, it was underground, but it wasn't underneath the building. It was underground, but offset. And he was worried it would not drop the building. Only the employee parking was directly under Fountain Place. Now, the undercover immediately said to him, "But you don't have an employee tag. How are you going to get into the employee lot?" And without hesitation, Samadi just said, "I'll ram the gate and run for it." So much for any hesitation or lack of motivation. So the undercover talked him out of it, said, "Look, the timer's going. It's an enormous bomb. It's going to drop the tower. Let's get back to the garage and you can do this with your phone," which they did. So they went back to the same location on top of the building. They were standing there against the edge, Samadi with his phone, dialing the phone number, cursing in Arabic because it wasn't blowing up, very frustrated. The undercover had a good camera on. We had all that. Unbeknownst to Samadi, the phone number he was dialing did not go to, obviously, the bomb. It went to the arrest team behind that door in the stairway who came out and arrested Hossam Samadi. So he pled guilty relatively quickly, got what I thought was a sweet deal of 24 years. Another comment I'll make about him and Al-Dosari was neither of them were remotely religious. This had nothing to do with faith. Samadi spent a lot of time with the undercovers trying to quote Quran and purporting to be very, very religious, and his need to be part of Al-Qaeda was all about religion, and they're both liars. So again, useful idiots with other motivations. But again, the closing point that I want to convey, and this is just the challenge that we face today, is that successes in these cases are not when we put handcuffs on these guys and not when we put them in a cage. It was the intelligence capability at headquarters that defined these strategies. Again, once my task force got the call and they pointed us and aimed us at Samadi and al-Dosari, we just did what we did. Samadi was a little more complicated, but we got it done. So that's all I have. I look forward to your questions. If you want more information on these cases, the Discovery Channel did a special on the Samadi case, and Netflix did a production on al-Dosari. But I look forward to your questions.
Those two case studies are extremely interesting. Even though I didn't work terrorism, I remember back then it was kind of an all hands on deck, and our whole office was helping on those cases, very significant cases in history. So at this time, I want to take the chance to ask Tom some questions that have been coming in from the audience. I think it's important to see if we can address some of these. So let me start with this one, Tom. Can you speak to how interagency collaboration has improved or not since the early post 9/11 years, and what lessons the JTTF has learned about information sharing across local, state, and federal levels?
Sure, and that's a great question because that really was the problem. And but I will tell you, and absolutely there were cultural issues. There was the egos that existed and still do. But we also had the wall. There was a really strict rule by DOJ that we do not let the intelligence community talk to law enforcement community out of civil liberties concerns. So to avoid even the appearance of that, we're simply going to build that wall. The problem was, of course, when you get to the terrorism mission, where JTTF members have to really serve as both criminal investigators, but also intelligence officers, and operate under two very different bodies of law, right? We have the whole body of criminal constitutional investigative law, and then all of the national security laws, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the National Security Letter statutes and others, and two bodies of law that were never designed to work together. With this wall in place, it was really difficult. So after that came down and everybody was put in one room and could really share information, it changed dramatically. When I was at CIA in 2012 and 2013, I was there for the Boston bombing, and I was Bob Mueller's lead liaison to the CIA. They treated me like a senior CIA executive. There was absolutely no issue whatsoever. So it really has improved. And again, it was largely because of the construct that they were working under. And also, there's no inspiration like desperation, right? So on the morning of 9/12, the feeling was this isn't going to happen again. So there was a motivation. But I really do believe in the 24 years since 9/11, just culturally, agencies have matured. We've changed. The whole world is more interconnected, right? So there has been profound changes. So, but good question.
Jennifer, please unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Tom, you've probably been following, but with the federal support drawing down from DHS, FBI, counterterrorism, what do you think state and municipal governments can do to support the JTTF?
Well, I don't think federal support is drawing down. The JTTFs are cooking, is my understanding.
It'd be more
I'm sorry?
more from the DHS side.
Could be, yeah. But I mean, the mission's evolving. Like it wasn't that many years ago, for the first time since 9/11, domestic terrorism was actually ranked a little higher in the terrorism portfolio than international terrorism because of what was going on domestically. But then we have attacks like Jabbar in New Orleans on New Year's Day on behalf of ISIS, who drives his truck down Bourbon Street at 3 o'clock in the morning and then gets out of his car shooting. And it's a straight ISIS attack killed by law enforcement, which reminds us this issue is alive and well. So I'm not sure I agree with that. JTTFs are still packed. Fusion centers are different. That's a DHS animal. Again, it's information sharing, very, very, very productive. But I think generally the JTTFs are very well staffed and very busy because again, there's a lot of online radicalization happening, and they're looking for the professional team coming in, but they're also looking for the fools like Jabbar, who wake up in the morning and decide they're going to do this. They're useful idiots, but they're no less dangerous. Is the problem. Yeah.
And to be clear, the fusion centers are separate from the JTTFs, but do we ever have any folks from fusion centers that are part of JTTFs?
Well, they're certainly in touch. Sure. I mean, they've always been. So yeah, they're distinct. They're pure information center entities, but they have a very close relationship with the JTTFs. And it's more about terrorism. They do get into some of the counterintelligence operations as well, but the fusion centers exist to facilitate information sharing and support of the counterterrorism mission. So,
looking forward, what technology or analytical tools are being integrated into JTTF operations to enhance threat identification and prevention, especially with the rise of encrypted communications and AI-generated content? Sheriff, you can address that.
That's classified. I can't tell you. Actually, I wouldn't know. What I can tell you is that they're staying on the leading edge of technology. Like I'm talking. Somebody had us going into web forums, right? Primitive stuff. This is prehistoric online communication, right? So what I can promise you is that they are on the leading edge with great relationships with the private sector. Doing things the private sector probably doesn't even know technically exists. And I have tremendous faith in the technical options that they have available to them.
Perfect. So from the legal side of the house, or a question that you could probably address, the question is the issue of entrapment must have been raised by the defense for Samadi. Can you talk about that? Was that raised, and the FBI provided much of the kit and shaped the modus operandi? What did the judge say about this defense?
So it actually was not raised. And in fact, because again, the truth is we really, really overdid that. It was such an obvious issue going in. And also, candidly, once we got into the in-persons, in a number of meetings with my case agents and key analysts and language people, we talked a lot about this because the legal issue of entrapment is fairly easy to get away from, right? To neutralize. But in my opinion, there's a second entrapment issue, which I just refer to as ethical entrapment. Maybe we can legally, this legally is not entrapment, but let's think real hard before we go forward with this. Because if this goes as Samadi wants us to take it, he's going to go to jail for a real long time. Is that the right thing to do here? So a lot of those conversations. But when the defense team wrote a letter to the prosecution to open negotiations for a plea deal, I think it was the second sentence of the letter started with, since there's clearly no entrapment issue, we're going to focus on A, B, C, and D in mitigation. So they immediately out of the gate threw that in. And the judge, Barbara Lynn, who I will tell you has the hides of a lot of FBI agents on her wall. She's a great judge, but she's a tough judge. Took the time at the end of the hearing to on the record, compliment the way this investigation was conducted, particularly with respect to the issue of entrapment. Now, since then, I think Samadi has filed motions or habeas petitions, I'm sorry, that are preposterous. And he claims, I kept telling him I didn't want to do it, and he's just fabricating nonsense. And anyone who looks at the record, it's very, very clear there was absolutely nothing approaching entrapment here. But you're right that this because we didn't want him to buy anything. He wanted to buy stuff. He kept saying, "I'll go buy this, I'll buy that." We were trying to control him. But you're right, that sets a ripe issue for entrapment. So very, very good question. Yeah.
Okay, we're getting down to the end of the hour, but I think we can probably address one or two more. Tom, there's been a large amount of coverage of growing roles and threats from minors in terrorism. Can you speak to your experience around this issue and any related challenges?
Yeah, tragically, it's always shocking how young men at young ages can be so violent. Now, I worked street gangs in Southern California on a task force in the 90s. So I saw 13-year-olds doing unspeakable things. I was in the military in Africa and saw young teenagers doing unspeakable things, but I'm still shocked. But it is a problem. It will always be a problem from a criminal justice standpoint. How do we treat them? But it also goes to the hunting strategies. How do you find them? But we have street crime every day in this country being committed by young men that it's hard to get your head around. So yeah, great point.
And of course, the social media aspect does not help today in the current times. Tom, can you speak to how legal attachés working on U.S. embassies collaborate with JTTFs? Is the legal attaché part of the JTTF?
They're not directly a part of it, but the legats work directly with Counterterrorism Division, usually, unless there's a specific issue that they put us in touch with, well, a JTTF in touch with. But there's a very strong relationship. Obviously, a big part of what legats are doing, in some countries more than others, but terrorism, and I know there are assistant legats in offices that are designated 100% counterterrorism. They're exclusively to liaison with the counterterrorism entities of the host country. But again, typically that goes back to the FBI Counterterrorism Division at headquarters, which then sends it out to the relevant JTTFs. If there's an operation, if you have somebody in a foreign country, I mean, I had an American on the no-fly list that we were tracking, a very dangerous guy coming out of the camps in Yemen, and he was stuck in Bogota. And I was working directly for months with Legat Bogota because headquarters handed it off to us. And I was sending agents to Colombia to interview this guy and look at him and liaise with the Colombian CT people. But it's all headquarters sponsored. Yeah. But yeah, big part of the Legat business, though. Sure.
Let's see. Given the rise of cyber threats, domestic violent extremism, and foreign influence operations, how do you see the JTTFs adapting their mission and methods maybe in the next decade?
Well, you're looping in the previous question on technology. They have to stay at the leading edge of technology. That's to me the single biggest issue. So with that, and then maintaining the intelligence directorate support, having that intellectual capacity to really analyze the data, and distill that down into those usable chunks. Just like at the CIA, and the FBI basically copied the CIA's model of parallel operations and intelligence. It's exactly what exists at the FBI since 9/11. So having that, maintaining that, and again, having the technical ability is absolutely critical. So
Perfect. I think that's all the time we have, but I do want to remind someone had the question if these slides will be available. This is going to be recorded and posted on our website, on our YouTube as well. So I just wanted to remind everyone, number one, thank you, Tom, for being here and providing such interesting insight on these two cases, and then just the history of the JTTF itself. I don't know that a lot of people know the history of it, so that was very informative. And please check out our website, extremism.gwu.edu. That's where we post all our up-to-date research, newsletter, and all the events that we've done in the past and our current events that we have scheduled. So I wish we had more time. We could talk probably forever. Tom's got such a unique background and history. So that's all we have. Thank you, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.